And welcome back, AP Economics students. I wanted to go through the graphs for imperfect competition, which there are three types. If you recall, there's four market types: perfect competition, and then the three imperfects, which are monopolistic competition, oligopolies, and monopolies. And all three of the imperfect competition graphs can look exactly the same. You just need additional information to know exactly which marketplace you're in. So for either of them, you can be making money, breaking even, or losing money. And I just wanted to go through those real quickly for a comparison. So whenever we draw the imperfect competition, we have our axes, price and quantity, and we also have the chopsticks. Now the chopsticks are different than perfect competition because Mr. Darp separates. And Mr. Darp separates into marginal revenue. The Mr. part of Mr. Darp goes here, and then the demand and price stays here, and average revenue actually drops off completely. So the chopsticks are MR and DP. So I'm going to put those with all of them. And then I'm just going to draw the examples of the three situations where you're making money, breaking even, losing money. So I'm going to start here with making a profit. So if you want to make a profit, the key is to make sure that your ATC is low enough that you're below your demand or price curve at the profit maximization quantity. So I'm just going to go down here kind of low on my picture and pick a point in between the marginal revenue and demand curve, and that's going to be my ATC minimum. And so when you go to sketch it here, you're just basically making what looks like an upward opening quadratic, and this is the vertex if you want to think of it that way. You could say, well, there is your average total cost curve. So now that I have it down this low, it's going to produce a profit. I'm going to come in through here with my with my marginal cost curve. So there is my Nike swoosh marginal cost curve. And now I have everything I need. Now when you see these, especially all in one color, you have a lot of points of intersection, and this is where you just got to be real smooth with it. So your tattoo from earlier in the year comes in handy. MR equals MC. So here's my marginal cost curve, here's my marginal revenue curve. So right there is your most important spot, and that's going to be our profit maximization. So I'm going to use straight edge here just to make a nice clean picture. And from that spot, I'm just going to dot down through there. And that would be my quantity of profit maximization. So I'm just going to put Q sub PM. All right, and so that's the quantity. And then you can see that you have 1, 2, 3 places that you potentially could make a statement about. This one, regarding the price, is never going to be asked. It's always about costs and price, because up here, this amount right here, this is giving you, right there, that is the amount of revenue that's going to come in right now. This quantity at that price, that rectangle is total revenue. And so we could put, here I'll just put P sub 1, there's our price. Now, where our quantity intercepts the cost axis, which is right here, or the cost curve I should say, that is going to be our costs. So our total cost is the lower rectangle, our total revenue is the upper triangle, or upper rectangle, or the larger of the two I should say, and just the top one is going to be your profit. So what I'm going to do is just shade in the profit box here. Okay, I need to know this is a imperfect competition making a profit, and shaded there is the profit box. So my total revenue is equal to that profit box plus my total costs. And the total cost is down here. There's my profit. The two together is going to be that rectangle. Now, the thing you don't want to misunderstand is sometimes when we call the graph breaking even, there's a difference between breaking even and the fair return location. So on this one right here, the next one, I'm just going to say, all right, what happens if we elevate the marginal cost, or the ATC, so that our total revenue is equal to our total costs? But this graph right here, I'm just going to title this one, this would be making a profit. Okay. So now let's break even. Now when you draw the break even graph, you, instead of drawing your ATC, it's the only when you do this, you want to draw your marginal cost curve first, because that will give you your target for your graph. So I'm just going to bring in my Nike swoosh marginal cost curve, MR equals MC, this point right here. So I'm going to make a nice straight line. going through there. And this point right here is super important because that is going to be, not only is that going to make my total revenue, but that's going to make my total costs. So what I have to do is squeeze in my ATC so that it's tangent, the demand curve is tangent to it right here. So whenever I do these, I like to go over to this level, drop down just a little bit, and that point right there is the vertex of my ATC. And then I can come over here and say, well, if this is my vertex, I just need to gently go upward and try to catch that. And then I will just duplicate it over here. And this is my average total cost curve. All right, and so what you can see, this is my quantity here again of profit maximization. What you can see is that the way we have this drawn here, my total revenue is at this quantity at that price, that's what I brought in, but it's also my total costs. So my total revenue is equal to my total costs. I have zero economic profit because they're equal to each other. Okay, so this would be zero economic profit, or this would be long-run equilibrium in monopolies and oligopolies. Now, one thing to clarify, make sure you realize that with the monopoly, this is the only one that this is true, is that when you're in the monopoly, the market is equal to the firm because there's only one company. Okay? So this one could be long-run equilibrium of monopolistic competition because firms do exit and enter, and in the long run, you are going to be breaking even. So this is the break even, or I'm going to say zero economic profit. Okay. And again, the strategy for making that, draw your marginal cost curve first. Okay. Now the last one is going to be when you're losing money, and all that happens is your ATC is going to be higher. So what I'm going to do is just go up here, and I'm going to clearly make my ATC minimum well above the curve here. So I'm just going to make that right about there. And then I'm going to put in my ATC. There's my minimum, and bring it back up. So it's a little bit pointy, but that's all right. Then I'll come through here with my marginal cost curve. So there's my marginal cost. Here is my ATC. And now I go back to my rule. Well, MR equals MC right here. And I'm going to use my straight edge here. And so a nice clean graph. All right. And so there is, again, my quantity of profit maximization. And then right here where I hit the demand curve, right there, this is going to be my total revenue. This is how much money is coming in. All right, it's this quantity at that price. But unfortunately, my costs are higher. So if I go up to here, I have that one. This is going to be, I'm going to shade this in, this is my loss up there. I'm losing that much money. And so for this one, what's kind of strange is that your total costs are equal to your total revenue plus the loss. The loss box right there. Okay? So these are the three things that can happen, and what you guys want to focus on is notice what's happening to the ATC in each case. The ATC just keeps rising. Now, again, the thing that keeps that's real important to know is that each one of these things could happen in a monopoly. But if you're losing money in the long run with a monopoly, you might just be getting subsidized, because otherwise you would never do this. But because the firm equals the market, if you're losing money, and you could just go out of business, you're the only one producing it, you go out of business. But if it's an essential item, the government will subsidize you to keep producing it. So maybe you produce electricity or gas. You could be doing this one. Zero economic profit is good regardless of your marketplace, because part of your cost is compensating yourself. And then over here, you could make profit in the long run in a monopoly because firms can't enter. This is great. So the one other thing I want to stress, this is so important that you get, this graph especially is good to explain to people that do not have a big econ background, is that why don't monopolies just jack up the price as high as they can? Well, this graph explains to you why. Look at this spot right here where my marginal revenue is equal to 0. You always want to keep in mind the importance of that spot, because that is the location that divides your graph into the elastic and the inelastic zone. So at that spot right there, I'm just going to make a dotted line going through here. Okay, and that red, hopefully that's showing up there, that should be red here. This is the elastic zone, and this is the inelastic zone of the demand curve, and actually even right there is where we are unit elastic. I'm going to put a UE right there. Well, if you are in the elastic zone where profit maximization is occurring and you decide to raise the price, listen real close. If you are elastic and you raise the price, people walk away, you'll make less money. You could only raise the price in the inelastic zone to make more money. So since we're always in the elastic zone, we're very concerned about MR equals MC. You don't just randomly raise the price, you'll make less money. And if you recall, underneath all of these was the total revenue curve, which was an upside down quadratic, and its maximal, its peak and maximum is at where marginal revenue equals 0. Okay, and I actually can tell you marginal revenue is actually a derivative, for those of you in calc. Marginal revenue is the derivative of total revenue, and so you can actually see that that's going to create a maximum on the total revenue. Derivatives going from positive to negative. If you're not in calc, don't worry about it. Someday, hopefully, you'll all be taking calc-based economics. It's a lot of fun. But those are the three graphs there. So I could do this little illustration on all of these where marginal revenue is 0. If you'll notice, we're always producing in the elastic zone. So we have to be still very sensitive to the price we charge to maximize revenue. Okay? Now, the other issue that can happen, if you're dealing with monopolistic competition or oligopolies, one thing to keep in mind is you could have side by side. Now, they're not going to do this, but you want to be thinking that if you are told you're in monopolistic competition, you do want to be thinking that there is something going on in the marketplace versus your firm. So even if your firm is imperfect competition, there is some consequences of what's going in the marketplace that will affect it. And you want to remember that if you're in monopolistic or oligopoly, monopolistic competition or oligopoly, just like Mr. Dark would move up and down, your chopsticks move up and down. In a monopoly, it doesn't because the market is the firm. But if you have something that's going on in the marketplace, for example, let's say there's a huge surge in popularity where your demand increases. In the market, they tell you, in the marketplace, there's a huge increase in demand, which is driving up prices. Well, what's going to happen is your chopsticks will rise because your demand curve's going to go up. Just like this, now this is a small graph, it's not really that important, just like in perfect competition, where we had Mr. Darp right here, when there was a huge surge in demand for a product, it would create a new Mr. Darp, and he would just move straight up. This dynamic they reserve for perfect competition questions, as far as graphing goes. But they could ask you a question regarding monopolistic competition. Let's say it's retail. Let's say it's jeans. That's a good example for monopolistic competition. You can buy jeans many places. And they say, jeans have gotten super popular. There's a demand and increase in the marketplace. What's going to happen to the firm? Well, if there's an increase in demand, the price went up, you can shift your chopsticks up, and it's going to adjust your points of intersection. But most importantly on these graphs, make sure you're practicing them, and you just want to be able to sketch them quickly. But there's your three: profit, breaking even, and the losing money. The last thing you want to make sure you don't get confused. I'm gonna overlap this. I'm gonna switch colors here. I'm gonna go to green. Make sure you don't confuse this graph with the fair return value. So just to explain, on this graph there is still a break-even point, even though we sometimes call this the break-even graph. So I just want to clarify. If you were making a profit, they will oftentimes say, where is the point that you're breaking even? So you want to be able to say, well, I can still break even with this graph, but that's going to be where price is equal to cost, and that would be right here. Okay, so where costs equal price, they call that fair return, or sometimes we'll call it the break even. That's a different context than the actual graph where your total revenue equals your total cost. Okay, and again, we have our ATC minimum is where we're productively efficient. What society wants is when supply equals demand. That's where we are allocatively efficient. Okay, and so That spot right there we would call fair return. This spot right here where supply equals demand. I'm just going to put an AE, allocatively efficient. And this spot right here, wherever you are at the minimum of your ATC, that is your productively efficient spot. And this spot gave us our profit maximization, but we elevated it to the price of profit maximization. So this just gave us our quantity for profit maximization. So what I'm going to say right here, I'm going to say profit maximization quantity. Okay, but we elevated up here for profit maximization price. In fact, I think I'll go ahead and circle that. And I'm going to say profit maximization price is right here. Okay, so there's our key points of intersection. And over here, just I wanted to point out, if you'll notice, if fair return is where costs equal your price, fair return over here, our costs equal our price at that spot, which again is why it's called the break-even graph. Okay, so just a quick review of your imperfect competition graphs. Make sure you're practicing those as you are reviewing. That's all we got for this one. Thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time.